took Rick James to a whole other level.
That was the first time I actually got the feeling of what the Beatles, the Jackson 5, what they went through, because wherever we went, there'd be a mob chasing us.
By now, Rick was a superstar and determined to live out all his larger-than-life fantasies.
You got people running after him to party with him, not him chasing them to party.
He would get out and dance, or he'd sit over there and eye all the women. And if he saw a girl that he wanted, he'll point him out. Security, go get her. And he got her.
He had a groupie like, yeah, boo. Like, and they be lined up, you know, and he'd cut it off at will. Like, he might catch him like a couple of live ones and be like, huh, got them and he gone. They doing everything that I need to be done.
But for the man who grew up as James Johnson, the high times weren't enough to soothe his soul.
I always used to think, well, do they want me for my money now? Can they be happy with me if I was still James Ambrose Johnson Jr. back home in Buffalo with no money and teeth crooked?
I remember him saying he didn't want to be like his father. And, you know, he didn't know him that well, but he knew he didn't want to be like him. And all that, not stepping up for your kids.
So at the height of his fame, Rick James reached back to his family and to the two children he'd all but abandoned years before.
We lost track of each other for a while. And then when he was getting ready to become the biggest success, he came back.
My dad made sure that, you know, we moved to a really good neighborhood, and he made sure that, you know, his presence was felt as a father.
I'm like, wow, there's another side of RJ that's a father. And he loved his children. James Johnson was a loving, caring man.
I would imagine that he was probably trying to make up for lost time, too. We went from there to there in the blink of an eye.
And Rick's desire to please went well beyond his family.
Rick was the most generous person I knew. Man, we didn't have to want for anything.
He had a big heart. You know, he was very giving. He helped people out.
He'd buy you clothes, give you watches. He would take 40, 50 people, let's go eat, let's go have sushi. He was that kind of giver.
So when people talk about he was this and that, they don't know him. But that was the sweetest dude in the world.
Meanwhile, Rick was putting his creative juices into overdrive.
I was doing Stone City Band album. I was doing Mary Jane Girls. I was doing Tina Marie. I was doing Process in the Do-Rags. I was doing a young lady named Val Young. And one particular time, all 5 of us were on the charts.
Rick was a brilliant man. When a person gives off that personification that he gave off on stage, and people who didn't really know him privately, you know, they would think that maybe that's all there is to him.
Ladies, you remember when you used to?
But Rick could also bear his soul on stage. Most notably, on his triumphant Street Songs tour, as he and Tina Marie played out the passions of their turbulent romance on his ballad, Fire and Desire.
He tells people that it was written for somebody else to sing, which was absolutely the most ridiculous story that I ever heard.
He was in love with Tina. Tina was in love with him. He was really writing it about their relationship, or what he perceived their relationship to be.
I think we both said a little bit too much.
Oh, we ain't said enough, my baby. No, baby.
It was almost one of those lovingly arguing songs, one of those battle type.
I got a new lady now, right?
A new what, baby?
A new woman.
Woman.
I have a new
woman.
Sweetheart in my life.
You know, he was like, yeah, well, look, I remember when I used to love him and leave him, and she was like, yeah, me too.
You got to tell her I said goodbye, baby.
We have sang Fire and Desire with just about every attitude or feeling that a person could sing.
You're supposed to get your bags.
My bags.
All your clothes.
Everything.
Everything you own. Your vitamins.
My vitamins.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, baby. And don't forget your
It was really a treat to watch them every night to perform that on stage.
Don't ask much from a woman, and I don't need much. I just want it all.
The emotion behind what they felt about each other, how they projected the song. You know.
Rick James was king of the world and about to slip over the edge.
The drug problem really got kind of severe when he started freebasing. That's when things really started to change.
Before we put the OxyClean name on a laundry detergent, we...
By the early 1980s, Rick James was at the top of his game and playing by his own rules, for better and for worse.
I mean, I was doing $7,000, $8,000 a week in cocaine and drugs. And I did this for a period of years and years and years.
I think he did it first for recreation, then it became necessary. And he never met a drug that he could refuse.
For a while, it seemed to work. Rick's next two albums, Throwing Down and Cold Blooded, were both gold-plated. But friends say that Rick made a critical turn in the early 80s, from snorting cocaine to smoking it, following an encounter with a musical hero, Sly Stone.
We're looking at Sly Stone, legend, and he's sitting on a couch in the back and he looks just toe up. This is Rick talking. He said, dude, we can never, ever, ever do that. 2 weeks later, Rick and Sly are in a room, a special room in Sausalito, freebasing.
That was just a side of him that you didn't want to see on a daily basis. He was more Rick James. James Johnson seemed to disappear.
He'd been in his room, you know, like 2 or 3 days just freebasing, you know, and come out all whacked out and all pissed off. I think that's where his downfall started to happen.
Rick's musical output went downhill as well. After Cold Blooded, 2 years went by without an album. And his next two releases, Glow and The Flag, had the feel of an artist whose best days were behind him.
The records didn't have the same feel because they weren't coming from the same place. The essence wasn't there. That funk was not there.
By 1986, Rick and Motown were suing each other, with Motown charging that James was failing his contract, and Rick countersuing for unpaid royalties. By the time they officially parted ways in 1988, the Stone City Band had left Rick behind as well.
When the lawsuit happened, they froze all the money. He couldn't pay the band. We hung around long as we could, and we just had to make that move.
Get tired of that crap, bouncing checks. How the hell is a check bouncing Rick James? I mean, I ain't put my brother down, but just, you know, that's business. I don't blame him. I blame other folks. Because he could have been on top, but he was sick.
After Motown, Rick signed a deal with Warner Brothers and surprised everyone with a comeback hit featuring Roxanne Shante called Lucy's Rap. But the single would be Rick's last top 40 hit, as his drug addiction became all-consuming.
Everybody was thinking, why don't y'all stop him? How the hell am I gonna stop a grown man with all the money in the world? Doing what he enjoys. Maybe he didn't enjoy it, but he thought he needed it.
Any security guy to work with us at some time had to save my brother. He OD'd so often. I can remember being in the showers with him upside down, turning him up, sucking mucus out of him.
I've been, you know, in the back of the ambulance, screaming down the street. And he's that far from leaving us. You figure now it's time to stop doing what you're doing. He tried. Nope, he couldn't do it.
It's the devil, like it's the monster. It really is. He became more and more secluded, and I think at some point he might have just wanted to give up.
Before we put the OxyClean name on a laundry detergent, we
You know what I'm saying about?
By the turn of the 1990s, Rick James' career was in free fall. Despite the success of Lucy's Rap, his next album for Warner Brothers was not even released in the U.S., and his drug use had passed the point of no return.
I had overdosed 3 or 4 times in my life, and I'd wake up in the hospital and I still didn't care. I still would go right back to using again.
He was so wild. When he'd get a certain high, I'd call it the 3-day window. After the 3rd day, you never knew what was going to happen.
Tanya Hijazi had begun dating Rick while she was a teenager. By the early 90s, they'd become inseparable.
They got into a lot of trouble together. So I don't know how good they were for each other. They kind of fed each other's addiction.
We were very codependent on each other. We were definitely the Bonnie and Clyde of rock and roll, for better or for worse.
And by 1991, the woman who meant everything to Rick James, his mother Betty, was dying of cancer.
His mother's death affected him tremendous. He went into a very deep depression. His mom's passed away.
It made him completely dysfunctional because he was devastated.
He loved her so much, so her going, that probably was the straw that broke the camel's back.
In August 1991, Rick and Tanya were charged with forcing a 24-year-old woman to commit sexual acts and burning her with a cocaine pipe while holding her hostage at Rick's home. Awaiting trial a year later, they were arrested again, this time for physically assaulting a female music executive during an argument.
The girl tried to kick me in the stomach, and Rick came in, and it was on.
My old lady was pregnant. And of course I went ballistic on her, and I'm sorry for that.
Sorry wasn't good enough. Convicted on both offenses, Rick James spent the next 3 years in Folsom Prison.
Going to prison actually really saved my life. Not only did it give me a chance to get all the drugs out of my system, but it also was a serious reality check. I made a big mistake. Being in prison was a way for me to pay for it. But it was also a way for me to understand Rick and to grow up.
For a while, it seemed that way. After his release in 1996, Rick and Tanya married and focused on raising their young son, Tasman.
When my dad first got out of prison, it was really fun because Tasman was really, really small. So it was like the 3 of us running around the house. We did family events, and it was like a normal family.
Rick returned to the studio in 1997, recording what would be his final album, Urban Rhapsody. But the record stalled on the charts. By the following year, Rick and Tanya had divorced, as Rick returned to some all too familiar habits.
You went right back into the same environment. It's impossible. You're going to keep doing the same thing, expecting different results.
While on tour in 1998, Rick suffered the first of several strokes. Then came hip replacement surgery and a pacemaker for his heart.
He had health issues because he was an addict, because he was freebasing as often as he could. And he was not exercising, and he ate excessively.
He was the biggest hero for a lot of people, but he couldn't be for himself, which was probably the saddest thing.
Through the early 2000s, Rick retreated from the spotlight. But in 2004, his friend Charlie Murphy began relating some of Rick's real-life adventures on Chappelle's show, with Dave Chappelle playing Rick James.
Dave Chappelle never spent a second around Rick James. But for some strange reason, he nailed Rick James.
It, introduced my dad to a whole new generation of people. Just to be back on the scene, I'm sure, is probably refreshing.
Just like that, Rick James was back. And one more time, he vowed to make the most of it.
I talked to him on the phone. Now, he is like, man, he is so happy. He want to get the band back together. I mean, he was like on cloud 9 again.
I think that he was in that mode where he was turning over a new leaf, a new Rick, and he didn't get a chance to complete that.
Rick James died from cardiac failure on August 6, 2004. He was 56 years old.
My whole body just collapsed. I didn't want to believe it, but at the same time, it's like, what do you expect?
But I felt like he was too good of a guy to go. He just couldn't separate himself from that lifestyle.
"10 years still hits me like that."
I haven't met any other person that comes anywhere close to being as free a spirit as Rick James was.
I'd like to thank you from all of my family for sharing and showing your love.
He used to love his laugh. He had that smile, man. When he smiled, he lit up the room, man.
And it comes from above. Don't you know that? Mary Jane, want to thank you. Stone City Band, want to thank you.
He made the whole world laugh, cry, sing, and be happy
All the people in my life want to thank you.
with a word or two
'Cause you know that we like it.
and a backbeat with some funk on top of that.
Not a lot of people agreed with the way he lived his life, but he lived it the way he wanted to live it until his wheels fell off. And he did it his way.
Don't you know music is something that comes from the heart? Music is something that will never stop, baby. Music is something that will never disappear. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, from